Good morning and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims versus the Holy Bible. So in the continuation of a previous video, we're going to go back into the verses of the Quran and Allah, and we're going to compare those to the character of God within the Holy Bible. And the reason we're doing this is because Muslims will claim that because in their language Allah is God, that must mean across the rest of the world, in your eyes and also my eyes, Allah is therefore God. But let's have a look in more detail. Can we pick out the details of the two holy books and compare and contrast the character of Allah versus God, and figure out, using our logical minds, if these two are indeed the same, or as I think they are completely opposite characters. So with that in mind, let's carry on where we left off. So where we got up to last time is we did the first 7 verses of Al-Fatiha, which was the whole book, very short book, 7 sentences long. And the conclusion we found is that in the first 7 sentences of the Quran in Al-Fatiha, Allah says, "I am Allah, I am great, you must praise me, I'm all merciful and all graceful." Then he repeats, "I'm all merciful and all graceful," and he says his guidance is what you should follow. You should follow his straight path, which he will tell you about, and do nothing else but that. And woe betide you if you do not. You will have Allah's mercy only when you've done that, otherwise you'll have nothing but wrath. In contrast to this, God in his first 7 sentences doesn't mention himself at all. We are not introduced to fear, wrath, or any type of displeasure. In fact, all that we find in the first 7 sentences of the Holy Bible, in the book of Genesis, is that God is lovingly creating the world and furnishing the world with a nice temperate atmosphere, plants and seeds, ensuring the future of humanity through the provisioning of air and food and safety. And he has also put lights in the sky, and he's getting the place ready for the introduction of human life. So, with that in mind, let's carry on where we left off. Now, I'm going to start with the Quran today, whereas last time I started with the Holy Bible, just to be non-biased and fair. So with that in mind, let's get back to where we were at the end of Al-Fatiha. So we move on to Al-Baqarah, the cow, and we're going to go through the first 7 sentences of that. And let me tell you, it's not going to take very long, because they're quite short. So, line 1, Allah the Lord of Mercies. So, I think what Allah is trying to tell us here is, in repetitiveness of his earlier verses, Allah is his name. He is the Lord of mercy. Despite the fact that we haven't seen him do anything merciful so far, all he's really done is blow his own trumpet and tell us how great he is, and threaten us with wrath and punishments if we don't perform his straight path, all the way up until the day of judgment, where we will die and be resurrected and judged by him. So, he's claiming he's the Lord of mercy. I don't really see how he's been merciful so far. But as we know, he doesn't care whether we understand or we have any comprehension of his word whatsoever. The main thing we must know is obey only Allah, otherwise you will get wrath. So, that's the first verse we come to in Al-Baqarah. So if we compare that to the next verse in Genesis from God, are we going to find the same thing or not? Let's find out. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be lights in the firmament of the skies to give light upon the earth." Now, you can already see a glaring difference in approaches between these two characters. They are definitely not the same character. But more than that, we can start to define what they actually are in singularity of each other. So Allah is easily defined as a wrathful, needy, emotional character who doesn't care about the creation, which he didn't create. He hasn't said in any part of this that he did the creation. He's commanding the creation, which is already there. He skipped past the beginning. He didn't describe that. But he wants to take control of the creation as if it were his. So he wants to own something which isn't necessarily his, which he didn't create. So we could tell Allah is a very envious character. He has green eyes of envy. He wants the creation to be under his command. And he'll punish you with pain and wrath and suffering and eventually death if you do not agree. He's an angry God. if he's a god at all. My speculation is he's actually Satan. So why would I say that? Well, let's refer back to the Holy Bible to see what God has to say about this. So, and God said, God is speaking. He's not speaking to us to command us in wrath or punishment or a day of judgment or anything. We haven't been created yet. He's speaking in order to create things. And so we know God's speech is so powerful, it brings physical reality into existence and makes the mechanics of things work. Whereas Allah's voice doesn't do anything like that. All Allah's voice does is instill fear into the creatures who he is trying to get to obey, so they don't naturally obey him. So when God speaks, the matter that he speaks to obeys his command. He is the master of all things and matter. He's the master of creation. We can see that from the text. Not so with Allah. Allah's a pretender. Allah likes to think he's the master of spirits, the master of mercies and grace. But you can see here, he's already had to use threats in order to try to get you to do what he wants. But he has suggested implicitly between the lines that you don't have to do what he's commanding. If you don't, he'll show you his wrath, but you can still disobey him. Not so with the God of the Holy Bible. When he says, "Let there be lights in the firmaments of the heavens to separate the day from the night," that's exactly what happens. You don't get light saying, "Well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go another path. I'm going to do something else." It just doesn't happen. Everything God commands happens immediately and fully to his command. God uses words and speech to make things happen. He's a God of action, not a God of simple speech. Speech is almost like a secondary thing. The speech is the tool he's using to make his commands real. Whereas Allah is using speech as a tool to try and convince you to do the work for him. He can't actually make you do anything. Whereas God is commanding matter into reality. You know, he said, "Let there be light," and there was. "Let there be night and day," and there was. "Let there be earth and heavens," and there was. "Let there be fruits with seeds," and there was. None of the fruits or seeds turned around and said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'll carry on." "Let them separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years." Now, think about it like this. God doesn't need signs or seasons or days or years because he never sleeps. We know that from later in the book. We're going to read about that. Who needs signs and seasons and days and years? Living creatures do. We do. If we don't have days and nights, we don't know when to sleep and wake up, and we'll die of exhaustion. And if we don't have seasons and signs to let us know, for instance, when the winter is coming or when the summer is coming, we won't be able to plan our day and be creative the way God is giving us the example of. So we can tell, even though we haven't been created yet in Genesis, God is laying the groundwork with a good example and leaving us signs, seasons, days, nights, stars in the sky so that we can find our own way. It's the exact opposite of Allah's straight path of obedience towards the day of judgment and death, and wrath if you don't do it. So we get more convincing evidence that God is not Allah. God is the opposite creature of Allah. Allah is the absolute contrast of God. God has been merciful and graceful in action. He hasn't told us that he's merciful or graceful. We can see in his actions that he is. Allah has performed no actions, apart from to speak into our ears, "I am the most merciful and graceful, and if you don't believe me, I'll punish you with wrath." Let's carry on. So we go to verse 3. Oh no, we go to verse 2, in the Quran of the Muslims. "This is the book, in its guidance sure without doubt, to those who fear Allah." 3. "Who believe in the unseen are steadfast in prayer, and spend out of them what we have provided to them." So what Allah is saying here, this is the book. Has prominence over all other books you're ever going to read in your life or find, i.e. this one. But remember, we haven't had this mentioned to us yet, so once again, I feel like Allah's given away something he didn't intend to give away here when he says this is the book. Of course it is. If it's the only book that exists, it's the book. So you wouldn't need to say that unless there was a previous book and you wanted to usurp the place of the previous book with your own version of it, like Allah is doing here with the Quran. Then he carries on to say, in it his guidance is sure, without doubt, to those who fear Allah. And so we know, if you don't fear Allah, then its guidance is not sure and has many doubts. So this is actually a factual statement dressed up as a command. Trickery, mystification, lying, manipulation from Allah to the reader, who, remember, has to follow the straight path, otherwise wrath and day of judgment and death. So the reason Allah's saying this is not because he's being merciful or indeed graceful. He's saying this to try and influence you, the reader, to do exactly what he wants and show him your obedience in slavery to Islam, which is what this book turns out to be. Now we refer back to the Holy Bible. What does God have to say? And it was so, and God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to rule the day and rule the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was an evening, and there was a morning on the fourth day. So still God isn't talking about himself at all here. He is making the world for us. That's what he's describing here. Whereas Allah chooses to spend his time waving his fist at you, saying you're going to get the day of judgment, you're going to get his wrath, you'll get mercy after you die, but only if you do exactly what you're told, which is this, the straight path which you don't get to choose, you have no say over. And Allah says, this is the book, which kind of throws shade on the fact that there may be a previous book. And we know from factual sources, this book was written, or so it is claimed, earliest 632 AD, after Domino, after Christ was risen. Whereas the book of Genesis is almost 1800 years old at the earliest. So we know this book definitely did come first, and that I suppose is why God is using it to lay out the groundwork of not only how his creation works in great detail, but also why it's important that we know what the creation is, what the function of each part of the creation is, and more importantly for us, because this is an example for us to follow, the creative process. That is really what God is communicating here, because he hasn't created humans yet. He's saying, plan out your creation, make it for someone. Make it for someone you love. That's what he's really doing here. He hasn't just created the heaven and earth to show off, or like Allah, so that he can stamp his authority and command it. He's creating the heavens and earth as a comfortable, nice environment for us to live within. So he's clearly put night sky, light, dark sky, smaller light, moon, stars, so that when it's turning around, if we can't see the moon or the sun, we have stars. He's even gone as far as to say, the lesser light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the greater light to rule the day. So he's telling us, the bigger one, you're going to see that in the day. So when you see the bigger one and it's light, that's the day, that's when you work. And the smaller one at night, to light up the night, that's the night time. That's not when you work. That's when you're going to be asleep. How do we know this? Because he goes on to say, God set them in the firmament in the heavens, and the reason he did this is to separate the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good, and then there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So he's literally saying, when there's evening, that's the end of the day. For you, go to bed. Then there was morning, a fourth day, so you wake up in the morning. So when you see the bigger light, which is the day, that means wake up, do your creative work, build the thing for the people you love. When the evening arrives and the bigger light goes away and you start to see the smaller light and the stars, that means end of the day. Go to bed, take the ones you love and go to bed. So without even saying so, without even describing it, purely through actions, behavioural examples, God has set forth how we should live our lives. Wake up in the morning when the sun rises, work throughout the day, make things for the people you love and have them in mind when you make it. Then when you see the moon and the stars and it's dark, that's the end of the day. Go home, relax, get ready for bed, sleep. Wait for the sun to come up and then wake up again. It's pure genius. It's almost poetry. Whereas Allah, in verse 4, says, "And who believe in the revelation sent to thee, sent before thy time, and in their hearts have assurances of the hereafter." So he's already talking about being dead. Bearing in mind, the first thing he said is, "I am the most graceful and the most merciful, and my guidance is always sure and true and without doubt, and you should always follow it, or I'll punish you with wrath." The first thing he says after that is, you have to believe in things you can't see, believing in the unseen. And if you're steadfast in prayer, you get to spend out of your prayers things they have provided for you. Now, who is they? Who is we in terms of the Quran? Because so far we know Allah and we know you reading the Quran. Who is we? Once again, Allah can't be bothered to tell you the information you need to understand his book. And he doesn't care whether you understand it. Well, just for your information, we in the Quran is Allah and his angels, which we're going to find out about later in the book. Much later in the book, actually. Not that much later, but it's not going to be in this part of it. And so, in conclusion of these two readings, we know Allah has cemented our position on his character. He is needy, he is angry, he is destructive, he is wrathful, he wants your obedience, your slavery, but he doesn't want to do anything in order to get it, and he'll punish you if you don't give it to him. But this could all be trickery because there's no proof. There's no action, there's no behaviour that suggests he can actually do any of this stuff. And his words mean nothing, they're just threats. Nothing is created, nothing is commanded. It's just an attempt to command. And you have to willfully submit to him in order for his commands to be followed. Otherwise you'll just walk off and do the opposite, like I'm doing now. Not so with God. God says, "Let there be light." There's light. God says, "Let there be a firmament to control the atmosphere." There's a firmament, there's atmosphere. He says, "Let there be fruits, let there be moon, sun, light, stars, everything else." And there is. None of this stuff has any chance to say no. There's no dissent. There's no arguments from these physical bodies. They do exactly what God commands, like that. And then at the end of it, he rewards them by saying, "And God saw this is good." The only thing he didn't say was good was the darkness. So we can surmise everything that the light touches is our kingdom. That's God. Everything in that kingdom is not only commanded by God, but more than happy to comply. There's no dissent, there's no arguing, there's no thought behind it. He says do, it does thing. Allah's the complete opposite. Allah is commanding you in darkness. So where we are having the described darkness by God, that he wants to alight, the darkness that's not good, that he creates the light in order to get rid of, that's where Allah's commands live. Because he doesn't want you to understand and he hasn't given you the information. So in conclusion, dear ladies, gents and Pikachus, we know the darkness which God wants to banish with his creation of light is where Allah's commands exist. And so we know the Quran of the Muslims, despite the fact that Allah thinks it's been written by God and commands them in God's spirit, is not at all what it seems. Allah is deceiving them, and he does call himself the greatest of schemers, the greatest of deceivers. Allah actually is commanding them in the darkness which God didn't like and commanded light to banish. Therefore, anyone who follows this book and the commands from Allah, who is Satan, is directly going against God. Not only that, they won't know what they're doing in their life. God has set forth a plan. Wake up with the dawn. Be creative. Be loving. Put those two things together and you can create something good for those you love, and it will be defined by the things that they want it to be defined by. God didn't just create the heaven and the earth, the plants, the atmosphere and the lights for no reason. He knows we are going to enjoy the comforts of these things and we're going to need food. So when we are finally created in the nest of Eden, we're going to be born into a birthright of everything we need. The bounty of light, nighttime for sleep, food for eating, company, marriage. Even God's love, it's all there waiting for us to be born into. Not so with Allah. Allah's given nothing apart from commands which don't even have to be followed. And so we know. The book of Moses makes it clear. God is not Allah. Allah is not God. Allah is the darkness which God banishes with his light, and humanity has free will enough to choose who they are going to follow and worship, and whose example they are going to put into practice in their own lives. And I would say to you this, even if you're not a Christian, you cannot deny God's example is an extremely good one. So whether you believe he's real or not, if you follow God's example, you as well can create something good, be appreciated and adored by the ones you love who will enjoy the benefits of your creation, and then you can have restful sleep at night and awake in the morning with food on your table. Whereas Allah will be providing the food for you, and if you don't do exactly what he tells you, you get nothing apart from his wrath. And there's no example how to avoid that, or indeed how to do anything else. The only example he gives is to be steadfast in prayer to Allah, great, merciful and bountiful Allah. And that's the end of this video. So, hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. And Muslims, you ever think about this? You know when Muhammad first saw Allah, and he fled in terror like a crying baby back to his wife and said, "I'm bewitched, I think I've seen Satan." Maybe he was right. Anyway, God bless. See you in the next one. Bye.